All right, I put a public shoot. Somebody's gonna be like, who's this? Like, uh-oh. All right. Hey, folks, how's it going? I hope you are doing very well. I'm so happy to be here in person. Hey, Maya, let me see your health assessment when you're done. All right. So before I get started and before I have a big announcement, and Emily, you can stay for the big announcement too, because I can't just throw that in front of you and just not tell you while you're here. But I did want to give a little time for Emily today. Emily is our psychology tutor, and y'all, she is a research method survivor. She has been through everything that you are going through. She has been through everything you will go through. So I think she is a wonderful resource, and she just wants to tell you a little bit about what she does and how she can help you. Take it away, please. That's not the camera.
Oh,
it's that camera on the tripod.
Okay, cool. So I'm Emily, as Dr. Chris said. I'm a third year here at CAUTI. I'm double majoring in psychology and gender studies. And then I tutor in the Learning Center Monday through Thursday, 6 to 9 p.m. online and in person, and it's in the lower level of the library. And I tutor astronomy, WGS 105, and anything in psychology. I just kind of wanted to introduce myself, talk about what I can help with and when I'm available. So the first thing is the papers that you guys turn in. I remember having to do them. They were difficult. Please use me as a resource and just come talk to me if you need any help with it or you just want someone to look over it. Yeah, and especially next semester too. And the method section that you'll do, all of it. I am here to help you. And then the homework problems, I know next semester, especially you guys will be using ESCI, which is kind of like a program. I don't know how to explain it.
It's basically a macro that is enabled through Excel.
Okay.
Yes.
There you go. It's a macro enabled through Excel, and it's really difficult to navigate at first. So if you need any help with that next semester, especially, I'll be here for that. And if you need any help with homework problems, please ask me. And also, I just want to encourage everyone to go to the Sunday night study sessions. You're doing those, right?
I haven't started them yet, but
okay.
I think with the writing, I think I will probably start those maybe this weekend.
Okay, so you should go to those. I really think that is an incredible resource as well. And also, I say in every class that I talk in, I think that there's a lot of stigma around getting help for tutoring. And you don't have to need help in a class to come to tutoring. A lot of people come and they know a lot of what's going on and they just need another perspective for a paper or just have a question about one thing. So please use us as a resource. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay.
Does anyone have questions? Thank you.
All right.
Cool.
Thanks. So if you want to stay put, Dr. G will Dr. G always sticks her neck out for you. I will bend over backwards for you. And Emily, if you want to stay put, you can hear the announcement too. So I mentioned if you see Dr. Roy, give her a congratulations because she earned tenure and she got promoted to associate professor. But I also found something else out too. My sabbatical for spring of 2022 got approved. And no, it gets better. I also received innovation funding for a mobile EEG system. So not only am I taking a sabbatical next spring to actually learn how to use EEG, I get to take my system with me and learn how to use it so that I can come back. And for those of you who will still be around, I will be able to teach you how to use it. So to kind of keep that in mind, that means you are kind of losing me for a semester, but I'm going to be coming back to Nevada about every other week. So I'm not gone. I'm only 2.5 hours away. I'll be at the University of Missouri. But it does kind of mean that over the next couple of months, especially as you start planning out your courses for next semester, think about what courses I offer, especially if next year is going to be your senior year. If you haven't taken a cognitive course with me, get it done. By the way, we will make sure that biopsych will be offered even if I'm not here. So, because we know y'all need that one. But if you need a cognitive course, get it in the fall because it will not be offered in the spring. So just kind of keep that in mind. So I'm very excited, but you haven't lost me yet. I'm not going anywhere. All right, so that's the announcement that I had. Thank you so much. I'm very excited and I will help you out and I will be here to help you until then. All right. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, no, I sent an email to my collaborators and they're very excited too. All right, so I want to apologize for something. So I didn't realize, so when I left on Friday, I knew that there was snow coming. What I didn't know was how much, and I didn't know that we were going to do this weird thing with classes. And so because of that, things that I normally would have caught at the beginning of the week, I did not catch. Case in point, quiz number 3, which you have all already taken, which technically was not supposed to post until this Friday. So y'all took it early and everybody did really well. Like everybody did very well, but that wasn't supposed to post yet. I didn't keep track of it on e-learning, and for that, I am immensely sorry. I do not like making mistakes like that. So to make it up to you, I did go back in e-learning and I did update a couple of things, and I want to show you what I did because I feel like I have to make it up to you. So I did something that I think was pretty good. All right. And you're going to like today because I got to tell you, if APA formatting was not your favorite thing, awesome. We're done with it. We're talking about ethics today, which is far more entertaining. So let me go ahead and pull that up. And then I want to just kind of catch up on some assignments and stuff like that. So I'm going to go to our assignment page. So you'll notice that the dates for our quizzes all the way up to quiz 4 and quiz 5 are correct. Oh, quiz 5 shouldn't be available yet. I will hide that later. But what you're going to notice is that on your syllabus, we have something called a debriefing form and an informed consent form that were originally going to be due next week. I have moved them 2 weeks from now, so they will be turned in with your IRB proposal. So today, when we talk about ethics, we're going to talk about something called an institutional review board. Anytime that you are doing human subjects research and you're collecting data from people, you have to submit something to an IRB. Now, because we are doing our study for educational purposes, you don't have to fill out an IRB, but I am having you fill out a mock one. So keep that in mind. A couple of people have not turned in their homework 3. And I get that with this week being all over the place and some of you not being on campus, if you could get those to me by Sunday, I'd like to give you credit for them. So if you haven't turned in homework 3 yet, get those to me. Your introductory paragraph is due tonight. If you need more time, let me know, but really, I just want you to try to write a paragraph. It does not have to be a good paragraph. We are talking 3 to 5 sentences. I want an attempt, and I will be pretty generous, and I will also give you feedback for it. Now, Emily did mention that I do Sunday night sessions. I haven't really instituted those yet, but normally what I do is that at 7 o'clock on Sunday nights, I basically have a Zoom meeting where you can come and ask about homework questions and stuff. We're starting to get more and more into the writing. And because of that, I think you're gonna, if you need help, I want to make those sessions available to you. So starting this Sunday, I think I'm going to institute the session. So if you have writing questions, if you want me to look something over, you can Zoom in on Sunday nights from 7 to 8 and do that. Now, the general rule is that if nobody shows up by 7:15, I'm like, okay, I'm done. So definitely if you, and I would say that if you know you're going to be later than 7:15, but you still want to meet with me, let me know ahead of time so I can stay put. But I want to make that available to you. And I will also kind of say on Tuesday at the beginning of class, I will talk a little bit about the IRB proposal and how it works and what you're going to need to do. And I do have a rubric for it. So you'll know exactly what you need to do as you work through it. But before we get to that, I thought it would be worth talking about ethics and what an IRB is before we start talking about IRB proposals. Does that sound fair? Like, no need to overwhelm you with the first part of this project yet. But I did want to apologize about that quiz. I did not know that, I did not catch that. And I felt like pushing back an assignment was the way I could say, I'm sorry, it won't happen again. And again, if you need more time on an assignment, I know that my class is not the only class that you have. I know that the world does not revolve around my class. I know you have other things going on. So if you need some help, if you need more time, you need to talk to me, okay? I am always happy to listen. I will usually grant a request, but you have to let me know. All right, so with that, let's talk about some research ethics. I love talking about research ethics. Ethics. There we go. So we are going, oh, this again. I forgot about that. We haven't been here so long that I completely forgot about asking me about, do you want to register? No, I don't. All right, so we are going to talk about a variety of different things with respect to ethics. Oh, sorry. So you can kind of see a few different things here. So we've got instances. We're going to talk about the history of ethics research codes. We're going to talk a bit about use of deception in research, as with Milgram's famous obedience to authority study. We're going to talk a little bit about working with special populations, such as children or prisoners. Something that doesn't often get covered in textbooks, but I think is really interesting that you might want to check out, is the instances, especially with neuroimaging on the rise, you can have what is referred to as an incidental finding. So what happens if you're scanning somebody for a research experiment and you find something wrong in their brain that you weren't intending? So we're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about plagiarism and scientific misconduct. Woo! All right, so what are ethics? So ethics is basically a system of moral principles or standards. Now, you might be asking yourself, now why on earth do psychologists need to focus on ethics? Like, the emphasis that psychologists have with ethics is massive. So to kind of put this into perspective, so here are a couple of requirements that we know that psychologists have to do. When I got into graduate school, I was required to be in an ethics class my very first semester. All of the new psychology graduate students had to take a class on ethics. When I was working in my doctoral advisor's research lab, I had to do ethics training every 2 years. So I would basically get training in the exact same stuff that I am teaching you right now, except I get it every 2 years. When I was in my postdoc and I was doing grant-funded research, I was required to have ethics training every year. Here, anytime that I'm doing research with a capstone student, I need to make sure I am up to date with my ethics certification. So anytime that you are doing psychology research, you are going to be asked to be up to date with ethics training. And hey, by the way, those of you that are thinking about counseling or behavioral health, you'll have ethics things to take into account as well. Psychologists of all types, whether they are doing basic research, applied research, if they're working in a clinical field or a research setting, all of us that are working in psychology will be asked to do training in ethics. Now, why on earth do we do this? I don't hear about chemists having to do ethics training. I don't hear about physicists doing ethics training for the proper treatment of electrons. Now, why on earth do we have to do this and other scientists don't? It's because we work with people. You never have to ask the consent of a metal or a liquid. You don't have to say, hey, sodium, I'm going to mix you with some chlorine. Is that okay? We're going to make salt with you. Is that all right? You don't have to do that. But with people, you have free will, you have dignity, you have respect. You have to treat them with respect. And because of that, because we work with people, we have to do ethics training. And for those of you that are also doing work in things like criminology or in other social science fields, such as international relations, if you want to do research, your research is also done with human subjects. So you will also have ethics training. So the emphasis on ethical research ultimately affects how we test our participants and how we treat participants. So how many of you have had me in a class where I have said the phrase, you could not do this research today? Maybe a few of you. But odds are pretty good at some point, if you have me in a class, I am going to say, you probably couldn't get this research done today. And the reason for that is that at the time, that was not seen as unethical. For example, the Stanley Milgram study, you can't really do it that way today. You certainly don't let people believe that they've shocked somebody with 450 volts. Today, they actually limit the shocks to 150. Remember, nobody's actually getting shocked, but that use of deception is also pretty controversial. Remember, some of these people believe that they killed somebody. You know, I don't know about you, but if I were a participant, I'd be pretty stressed. So the way that, so basically this focus on ethics is always modifying how we treat people and how we test them. So we are expected to be aware of and abide by ethics codes. Ignorance is not an excuse. And it's not like other fields don't have ethics codes. So for example, you are looking at probably one of the best known ethics codes ever created. This is the Oath of Hippocrates, better known as the Hippocratic Oath. Now, some of you might know the Hippocratic Oath as an oath that all physicians take. Usually, I usually hear medical students saying the Hippocratic Oath. I would not be surprised if other physicians and also potentially nurses doing a version of the Hippocratic Oath. So I'm going to read this to you. So I'm going to look up I am going to pull up, yeah, I'm going to Wikipedia, but I hope that's okay. Remember, Wikipedia is a wonderful jumping off point. So before you write down the rest of this, I want to go to that Wikipedia. I was tempted there. I started typing hippo and it said, do you want to look up hippocampus? I'm like, maybe. I like talking about brain parts. All right, so odds are pretty good if you've ever heard anything about the Hippocratic Oath, the phrase first do no harm comes to mind. But the Hippocratic Oath is so much more than this. So I am going to the original Hippocratic Oath talks about gods and things like that. The more modern version that was created in the 1960s kind of removes that. But yes, this oath was written by somebody, and yes, this is his name, Louis Lasagna, or Louis Lasagna. But I actually really like this, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and we're going to read this. And I want you to kind of notice what things stand out as I read this. So this is used by many medical schools. So if you go to medical school, that first day of medical school, you usually get your white coat, and that white coat ceremony is a huge deal. The other thing that you'll do when you get that white coat, you're going to get to say this oath. So this is what all physicians, at least modern physicians, have had to say in their white coat ceremonies. I swear to fulfill, to the best of my ability and judgment, this covenant. I will respect the hard-won scientific gains of those physicians in whose steps I walk, and gladly share such knowledge as is mine with those who are to follow. I will apply for the benefit of the sick all measures that are required, avoiding those twin traps of overtreatment and therapeutic nihilism. I will remember that there is an art to medicine as well as science, and that warmth, sympathy, and understanding may outweigh the surgeon's knife or the chemist's drug. I will not be ashamed to say I know not, nor will I fail to call in my colleagues when the skills of another are needed for a patient's recovery. I will respect the privacy of my patients, for their problems are not disclosed to me that the world may know. Most especially, I must tread with care in matters of life and death. If it is given to me to save a life, all thanks, but it may also be within my power to take a life. This awesome responsibility must be faced with great humbleness and awareness of my own frailty. Above all, I must not play at God. I will remember that I do not treat a fever chart, a cancerous growth, but a sick human being whose illness may affect the person's family and economic stability. My responsibility includes these related problems if I am to care adequately for the sick. I will prevent disease wherever I can, for prevention is preferable to cure. I will remember that I remain a member of society with special obligations to all my fellow human beings, those sound of mind and body, as well as the infirm. If I do not violate this oath, may I enjoy life and art, respected while I live, and remembered with affection thereafter. May I always act so as to preserve the finest traditions of my calling, and may I long experience the joy of healing those who seek my help. So as you listen to that, what sort of things stand out to you as you hear that oath? What sort of things did you notice in that oath? Yeah, Emma.
So it struck me was thinking of patients as people instead of just like a disease.
So thinking of patients and seeing them as actual people, okay? And that's really important, not diminishing them. Anybody else?
I find it funny that it said being able to take a life is awesome. I was like this awesome responsibility. I was like, that does not seem awesome at all.
I think they're using awesome in the way that it used to be meant, where awesome is, it is a huge responsibility, not necessarily a positive one. Like we use awesome for like good things, but awesome can mean a little bit more than that. But yeah, they have the power to take a life. That is a big responsibility that I certainly would not want to be in charge of. Also, I pass out when I see blood. Yes.
I like the fact that they said if you don't know, you just it and calling someone
Right. So having humility, that is something that we absolutely need to see. You may be a neurologist, but you may not necessarily know very much about how to treat a broken bone. Well, you probably know some of the basics. You probably know how to put it in a splint. But beyond that, we shouldn't expect a neurologist to be like an or working on like bones or things like that. All right, anybody else? Did you notice there was discussion of integrity? So again, kind of staying humble within your area of expertise, calling in resources when you need them, keeping patient information confidential. I thought that was very interesting. And then also, above all else, avoiding harm. Physicians can absolutely cause harm. And what I find interesting is they not only mention, I can make this person sick, but there may be some societal repercussions, there may be financial repercussions or familial repercussions. So this is a really big responsibility. Now, psychologists are not necessarily doing life-saving things the way that physicians are, but we too should also work to avoid harm. So let's talk about the development of our modern ethics codes. And folks, it always seems to come back to Nazis, doesn't it? So in this particular instance, our current modern code of ethics is basically an outgrowth of World War II. So after the events of World War II, we had what were referred to as the Nuremberg trials. Members of the Nazi Party and the Nazi regime, including many scientists, testified about the horrifying medical experiments that were performed on concentration camp inmates. This included things like removal of tissues to study whether or not regeneration was possible, as well as early studies on transplantation. So here's the thing, transplants can be really beneficial. They did not necessarily have a great start. And additionally, concentration camp inmates also were exposed to various types of diseases, various types of gas, including mustard gas and tear gas, extreme cold temperatures and burns to see exactly how much the human body could take. I am not going to talk more about these experiments because they are horrifying. And because of this, so these were done by Nazi research scientists. And then based on that, and based on these horrifying findings, this led to the development of what we call the Nuremberg Code. The Nuremberg Code gives an outline of what an experiment needs to be able to do to be permissible. Now, the great part is that for most of the experiments that you might want to do, most of them are going to be permissible. If you have experiments where you actually want to electrically shock people, and by the way, we're not talking about Milgram where you're fake shocking somebody. I mean, you're thinking, I want somebody to learn, and so I'm going to shock them for real. You're probably not going to be able to do that. Okay. And one other thing that I would mention, so you hear about these Nazi experiments and you go, that's terrible. The Nazis were awful. And here's the part where I tell you, the United States has done some really terrible things in the name of research. Absolutely. And we'll get there. So here are the major important tenets of the original Nuremberg Code. And you're going to notice that a lot of these tenets continue to pop up in more modern ethics codes, including things like the Belmont Report. So there's a huge emphasis on voluntary participation. Can inmates at a concentration camp basically say, I don't want to do this? No, they cannot. So one of the things that is ultimately critical, that is probably one of the most important aspects of any research study that you do, participation needs to be voluntary. What this means is that you can have a person who is interested in your study. They will take part in your study, and then 5 minutes before the study is about to end, they decide they're bored and they want to quit. You know what you do in those cases? You let them leave. And by the way, folks, that has happened to me before. I've had somebody who was in an experiment, and 5 minutes before we were about to be done, they decided they were bored and they wanted to leave. You let them leave. That is voluntary participation. You do not force them to continue. That's one of the other issues with Milgram's study. If you'll remember, anytime that a participant was becoming uncomfortable at the thought of shocking another person and they wanted to leave, you had somebody there in a white lab coat going, it's essential that you continue, basically coercing them into continuing. So there's an emphasis on voluntary participation here. One other thing that I will kind of mention in addition to this aspect, what if I told you, and I'm gonna give you a scenario and I want you to figure out if this is voluntary participation. So let's say I come up to you and I go, hey, I'm doing a research study. It only takes about 30 minutes, but you get $100 if you do it. Would you want to do it? Is that voluntary participation? I see a lot of people shaking their heads. Why not? Why is that not voluntary? Right, well, it's not so much a bribe. You can pay somebody for participating, but here's what's really critical. You don't pay somebody $100 for participating for 30 minutes. Usually you give them 5, maybe you give them 10, but you can't give them an incentive that is overinflated. That's coercive. Everybody's going to say yes, not because they actually want to participate in your study, but because they want the money. Here's something else that is also a little bit coercive. You're doing a research study and you go up to your friend and go, will you help me out? This would really help me out. Exerting that kind of pressure is coercive and is against the idea of voluntary participation. If they do not want to take part in it, we don't force them. If they don't want to stay in it, we don't force them. We let them go. And here's what's really critical too. If they decide to leave, we don't go, okay, you're not getting any of your money then. You can't do that. Additionally, prior to consenting, so voluntary participation implies consent. Next, participants need to be told about the purpose of the study and any risks. And folks, you need to be telling them about the risks no matter how small. Do you know what kind of risks tend to pop up in mice studies? Does anybody have any idea? So they have to look at things like lists of words or colored squares on the screen. What is the biggest risk that's going to happen in that study? You're going to get bored, but you still have to tell them that they might get bored. The biggest risk is that you're going to be bored. And occasionally I will mention that you might experience some eye strain, but you still have to mention it. You have to mention any potential risks and any, you also need to tell them the purpose of the study. Now there's a catch there. If there is a trick to the study, so for example, a couple of years ago when I first started doing these replication studies, we gave people sentences to unscramble that basically gave them an elderly stereotype. So our sentences had words like old, gray, Florida, slow, helpless, things like that. Basically, we were trying to prime that elderly stereotype. And researchers have actually found that when you prime that elderly stereotype, some people report that participants walk more slowly as they leave. We didn't actually find that, and I didn't think we would. It's hard to replicate. Now, when I tell somebody the purpose of my study, am I going to tell them, we're going to prime you with an elderly stereotype and see if you'll walk slower? How do you think that's going to go over? I'm going to get the results I want because I told them exactly what I was going to do. You don't want to tell them the true purpose of the study. If you have to deceive them, like we did, you have to tell them the true purpose of the study at the end. But we basically said, you're doing a language scrambling task. We're looking at language proficiency with how quick you unscramble these sentences. And then after the study was over, we said, this wasn't really about language proficiency. This was about priming a stereotype. We're sorry that we deceived you. And that's what you have to do. In addition to telling people about the purpose of the study and the risks, we want to avoid unnecessary risks. The benefits of the study should always outweigh any risks. And additionally, this should be performed by people who are qualified. I don't go into a hospital and go, I'm a psychologist who teaches about the brain. I'm going to do brain surgery now. How do you think that's going to go over? I'm probably going to get arrested because I'm not qualified. Now, likewise, I wouldn't expect a neurologist to come here and go, I'm going to do a memory experiment. They're not qualified. So we want to make sure that this is performed by people who are qualified. Now, when you write your IRB proposal, go ahead and assume you're qualified, because even if you don't think you are qualified, you are being overseen by somebody who is and who teaches about research methods every year. So the next thing that we have to talk about is the Belmont Report. So I mentioned that the Nuremberg Code was basically developed because of work that the Nazis did. And people can think, oh, that's terrible. Those Nazis were so bad. Nothing bad like that would ever happen here in the United States. The United States would never do something like that. Oh, yes, we do. And we have. If you've had me for drugs and behavior, you've heard me talk about a little CIA program known as MK Ultra, where college students and people in the military were unknowingly dosed with LSD to see if it could actually be a kind of a way to get spies to talk. So we've unwittingly, inadvertently dosed people with LSD without their consent. Additionally, and I actually kind of learned about this through some of my ethics training. We've gone into other countries and we have tested out, for example, really high amounts. So when we were first testing out birth control pills and putting them on the market, we gave extremely high doses to women in Guatemala, far higher than any dose that most people would get here with birth control pills. We have sterilized different groups of people, either because of issues related to race or issues related to mental illness or not being fit. And one that is coming up quite a bit lately, especially in light of the COVID-19 vaccine, is the Tuskegee syphilis study. This one's going to be gross, folks. So it is often said, so when people talk about the Tuskegee syphilis study, the general idea behind the study, we did not go around giving people syphilis, as far as I know. What I do know is that that US scientists basically recruited 600 Black men for a study in Tuskegee, Alabama, for a longitudinal study to see what syphilis could do. Now, here's what's interesting. Syphilis is a sexually transmitted infection. It has a cure. And certainly within the context of this study, at some point, there was a treatment. It is treated with penicillin. It's easy to treat. 2/3 of these men, so 400 of these men had advanced syphilis, and they didn't know. And here's what's more important. The researchers never told them. Now, here's one of the things that we know about this advanced syphilis. You end up having neurological effects. So this is going to get really bad. These people did not necessarily know what was happening to them, and the researchers did not tell them, and they did not provide treatment. And that's horrifying. And here's what makes it even more disgusting. After these men that had taken part in this study had died, the researchers offered, remember, this is Tuskegee, Alabama. These people are impoverished. These people are poor. They probably don't have the money to even get treated for their illnesses. Their families are struggling. And what do? We basically go, hey, we'll pay for your burial, but in return, we get to autopsy them. It's disgusting. We have a really bad track record, especially when it comes to groups of people that we haven't always treated very well. We have a terrible track record of treating them like trash when it comes to research. We have to do better. So when this came out in 1979. So for most people, this was the first time they had ever heard of this study. And hey, folks, by the way, we didn't apologize. There was not an apology made to these people until 1997 when President Clinton did it. So you've probably been hearing about the Tuskegee study with respect to vaccine hesitancy. In general, the medical industry has not always been kind to people who are Black, to people who are Latino or Latina. We haven't always done right by people. We need to do better. But what came out of the Belmont report were three major ethical principles. First, respect for persons. Second, beneficence. Does anybody know what the word beneficence means? It means we do good and we do not do harm. And then justice. So here's what justice means. Justice means that if there is a treatment available for a certain type of illness, we need to make sure that it is available for as many people as possible, not just those who can afford it. We need to make sure that treatments or advances or ideas that could be helpful are available to everybody, not just the wealthy, not just the dominant groups. From the Belmont report, we have what is referred to as the common rule. The common rule ultimately builds on these three principles. Any agency that funds human subjects research expects you to abide by the common rule. So that means if you're getting funding through the National Institute of Health, which a lot of psychologists do, or the National Science Foundation, or from any sort of societies like the APA, the American Psychological Association, the Association for Psychological Science, if you're getting any kind of funding from those mechanisms, you are expected to abide by the common rule. And hey, folks, even if you're not getting funding, you should still be abiding by the common rule. So if you want to come to me and do work on a capstone and you have an idea for a research study and it's not ethical, I don't care that we're not getting funded through NIH or NSF. I'm still going to say, I can't do this with you. It's unethical. Colleges get in trouble when unethical research is performed. They get sanctioned, and for many places, that means that they may not be allowed to do research for a certain number of years. This is serious business. People are important. They're a source of your data, but that doesn't mean you treat them like objects. They're people, and they're helping you out. Treat them with respect. Always. I'm shocked. I'm not karate chopping, but I should be. Okay. Does anybody need some more time here? So now let's kind of talk about the more modern APA ethics code. And I wish I had more time to talk about all of these different ethical aspects. I don't have time for all of these, but I want to talk about what all of these mean. So the general principles basically build off of the Nuremberg Code and the findings from the Belmont Report. The APA Code of Ethics basically includes the principle of beneficence. This means we do good, and non-maleficence, which means we do not do evil. So if you've ever, I haven't said this phrase in a while. I used to say it a lot more, but I think it bears repeating. Use your powers for good. Don't use your powers for evil. We engage in fidelity and responsibility. Remember, ignorance of ethics is not an excuse to be unethical. You do your best to be trustworthy. You do right by your participants, and you act responsibly. The next thing that we do is integrity. So here's what integrity means. We don't lie about our data. We're going to talk a lot about ethical reporting of data. We don't lie about our data. We don't make our data out to be more than it is. We don't steal other people's ideas. We don't take credit for other people's ideas. We behave with integrity. It also means, for example, that we stay, for lack of a better phrase, we stay in our lane. I am a cognitive psychologist. I should not be going to do research on people with psychological disorders unless I am collaborating with somebody who knows more than I do. So I notice where the limits of my expertise are, and if they're outside my area, I recruit help. Somebody knows more than I do. EEG because I don't, so I'm getting help from people who know what they're doing. We also have the principle of justice. If we're trying a new type of therapy, for example, and we're trying to see if it works, at some point the goal of that new type of therapy should be to make it available to as many people as possible. If we have a pharmacological treatment, if we have a drug-based treatment that works, the goal should be to try to get that to all people. And I think we are going to hear a lot more about this principle of justice in a wide variety of ways in the coming years. We need to make sure that the things that we do, the things that we learn, and the ways that we can help people can be shared with all people, regardless of what race they are, regardless of what ethnicity they are, regardless of their gender or their class or anything else. We need to have justice. And then finally, we need to have respect for others' rights and their dignity. We do not harm them. We do not try to embarrass them. We do not humiliate them for the sake of research, which is why I always find those people that try to catfish online and then they're like, oh, it was a psychology experiment. A real psychologist would never. A real psychologist would never. That's not respecting somebody's dignity as a human being. So we have respect, we have dignity. This is especially going to be important when we're talking about groups of people that may not be able to give consent as easily. So that can include groups like prisoners. That can include groups like the elderly. That can include groups like children, pregnant women, people with disabilities. So that is when it especially becomes important. So let's talk a little bit about some different ethical standards with respect to research. Okay. So This is from the previous textbook that I used. I will have to go back and look in Morling in your current textbook to see. But if you want to see an outline of the APA ethical standards, we actually have there are quite a few. APA, what did you do? APA Ethics Code. Here we go. APA Ethical Guidelines. So if you go into here, we go to the APA Ethics Code. Where is it? Here we go. So here, if you go to the American Psychological Association, you go to apa.org/ethics/code. Tonight, I will send you an email about whether or not these ethics codes are included in your textbook. I think they might be. But we do have some amendments, but we have several different sections. In general, we're largely going to focus on section 8, but I want you to look at a couple, if you're interested, there are a couple of different things. So there's ethics related to ethical issues, conflicts between ethics and law, conflicts between ethics and organizational demands, competence, which is about making sure that you stay in your area of expertise, human relations, privacy and confidentiality, advertising, record keeping, education and training. If you're interested, there are some ethical guidelines for therapy. There are also ethical guidelines for section 8, which is what we are going to focus on, research and publication. This is a research methods class, so it kind of figures this would be the one that we'd focus on more. So what do we need to do to ensure that our research is ethical? Yeah, you get back on there. The projector is really slow. I've been hearing that with all the snow and stuff like that, that e-learning's been kind of pokey. Does anybody have any family in Texas? Does anybody have any friends who are in Texas? Think good thoughts for them and check in on them. Definitely. I have somebody in my trivia group who, at least on Monday night, didn't have power. So keep your fingers crossed. Huh? We haven't had any since that one. There haven't, at least at my house. Now, I'm not that far away from y'all at Cotty. We only had that one on maybe Monday night or early Tuesday morning. And that was largely because of, oh gosh, it's gonna, like a transformer circuit or something like that. And that basically knocked out Nevada, Brawna, and Moundville. But that wasn't a rolling blackout. Like the news explicitly said it wasn't a rolling blackout. But we didn't have any in our house, thankfully. But I'm just glad it's warmer now. Wonderful perspective. Remember last week when 20 degrees felt cold? Now, doesn't it feel great? That's the power of perspective. It's gonna feel like summer on Saturday when I drive to Joplin to get groceries.
40 degrees.
It's gonna be like summertime. I'm gonna prance around in a tank top and shorts. No, I'm not. I'm too cold. But we're getting there. We're getting there. We actually have a day next week that's supposed to be near 60, so enjoy it. March is weird. Okay. Now let's talk about an IRB. So I have a lot of experience with IRBs, and here's why. Anytime that you are thinking about doing research, before you ever conduct that research, you have to get approval from a college or institution's institutional review board. Now, usually IRBs will be present. Every college and university that does research will have an IRB. I would also probably bet that hospitals that do research also have an IRB. So you can't conduct any research until you get approval from the IRB. Like if you're noticing that I'm talking with a period at the end of every word, that's because this is important. So what does the IRB do? The IRB basically evaluates whether proposed research complies with ethical guidelines. Their job, they don't care about whether or not the research study will come to good results or whether you'll get significant findings. They care that you are being ethical. They care that you are being ethical in any advertisements or marketing that you might do for this study, how you are describing the benefits, if there are any benefits, what kind of benefits, what the risks are. They're going to look at your informed consent sheet. They're going to look at your debriefing form, and they're just going to make sure that you are abiding by those guidelines. Now, an IRB is usually made up of multiple people at an institution. So you have at least one person who is outside of the institution. You at least have one person with no science background, and you have at least one person with a science background. Now, ideally, you have multiple people outside of the institution, multiple people with a science background, and multiple people with no science background. Now, when I first heard about this in undergrad, so when I was in college like you, I got a little indignant. I was like, what's an English professor going to be able to tell me about the ethics of my research? They don't even know about research. Why is it useful to have somebody with no science background looking at your research? There is a benefit. Yeah, Maya. They're not going to be biased. They can notice. So one of the things that we find, and I kind of find this too, there's a very well-known phenomenon known as the curse of knowledge. So when you first learn something, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but the more that you get locked into your field, the harder it becomes to explain to people who aren't. And it becomes really easy to do things because that's the way that other people in your field do them. Somebody who is outside of your field and somebody who is outside of science is not going to really necessarily understand your behavioral design. They may not understand your survey design or anything like that, but they have the privilege of not being so mired in scientific research that they may be able to look at your study with fresh eyes, in a way that other people who are versed in science would not. Does that make sense? So we can get really snotty and be like, well, they don't do anything with science. What do they know? They can give us a perspective that we otherwise would not get. And remember, it takes all kinds. We need a variety of different perspectives. The goal is to be ethical. And if an English professor or a philosophy professor says that something we are not doing, something that we're doing is not ethical, we should probably listen. Because if they can notice it without scientific training, it probably means it's a pretty glaring error. So here's something else. Now, you are all writing mock IRB proposals. I will be looking at them. I will be grading them. But is anybody here thinking about doing capstone research of some kind? It's okay if you're not, no judgment. But if you ever want to do research and you submit it to an IRB, and the IRB tells you that there's something you need to fix, what should you do? You listen to them. So the IRB can be really nitpicky. So here's an example. So here's a Dr. Gilchrist story. So I was coming up with an idea for an fMRI study. And I was going to look at young adults and I was going to look at older adults over the age of 65. And so I had similar informed consent sheets for both age groups. And then the IRB got in touch with me and they said, we think everything's okay, but could you please take the phrase, if you are pregnant, if you may be pregnant, don't take part in this study from the older adults informed consent sheets. And of course, my first thought was, but that doesn't matter. And second of all, I almost wanted to joke, but what about those instances where a woman over 60 gives birth to a child, we need to make an allowance for that one pregnancy, that one miraculous magical pregnancy. But don't do that. Here is how you should respond. If the IRB tells you to jump, do not argue with them. You say, yes, how high would you like me to jump, please? So if the IRB recommends that you change something or add something or fix something, don't argue with them. Do you know what happens if you argue with them? You don't get to do your research. The only way you're going to get to conduct your research is if you make the changes that they recommend and you answer their questions. So if they tell you to do something, I don't care how nitpicky it is, and it is going to be nitpicky and it is going to be frustrating. Sometimes the things that they have dinged me for, I'm like, really? That's a hill you want to die on? But here's the thing. They're basically allowing, you can't do research until you get their approval. How do you get their approval? Do what they tell you. So, yes. Okay, now here's what's important. Are all projects subject to IRB review? No. For example, our research study is not up for IRB review. We are doing our research study for educational purposes, and we are not sharing our study with anybody else. We are talking about it solely within the context of this class. So we are doing research for educational purposes. Any research that is based on a truly anonymous survey, any research that is based on an interview, a naturalistic observation of behavior in public, or an analysis of a pre-existing data set. So if you want to analyze census data, that is not you don't have to do an IRB review. If you are doing a naturalistic observation and just watching people and seeing how they behave out in the world, that's not subject to IRB review. All of these are exempt. But just because you don't need IRB doesn't mean that you still have to abide by ethical guidelines, even if you are not getting reviewed. So for example, for our study, we will be doing informed consent. We will be giving people the option to participate or not. We will not be penalizing people who are not participating. So because of that, we're still going to comply with ethical guidelines, despite the fact that we don't need IRB review. Okay, I'm going to have a sip. This is the first day this week I've had to teach with a mask on. It's really weird. Okay, so boo, my research isn't exempt. But that's okay, folks. I always have to do IRB review, and I basically just throw colored squares on a computer screen and have people look at them. Now, here's what's important. Now, many research studies are what are known as minimal risk. So minimal risk means that the risks that you experience in this study are no different than the risks you would encounter in everyday life. So for example, in a lot of my research studies and in our research study, we're going to be exposing people to words and asking them, does it rhyme with something? Does it fit in a sentence or things like that? Or is it in upper or lower case? What's the biggest risk of our study? Boredom. Is boredom something you experience in everyday life? You might even be bored right now, and that's okay. But my point is is that that kind of study is what we would call minimal risk. It's no different than the risk you would experience in everyday life. Interestingly enough, for those of you that have had me for biopsych and have heard me talk about the dangers of MRI, and by the way, those of you who are currently in biopsych, we're actually going to talk about the dangers of MRI tomorrow. It's a big giant magnet, but here's what's interesting. It's no more than minimal risk. You know why? Because people get MRIs all the time. And as long as you are with somebody who knows what they're doing, it's perfectly safe. So most studies are going to be subject to what we call expedited review. That means that you don't have to consider the research study for as long of a period of time. Only some people review it. So most of my research is always going to be expedited. And folks, when you complete your IRB proposal, your mock proposal that's due in 2 weeks, you should also be picking expedited. You will be asked to indicate what type of review. This is expedited. Otherwise, if you have more than minimal risk, you get what is called full review. So for example, my research methods instructor was a graduate student in clinical psych, and she did a lot of work on eating disorders. Now, when you ask people questions about eating disorders, that can be really sensitive, right? Those questions can be really sensitive and really triggering. And because of that, a lot of her research was actually full review. Now compare that to mine, where the biggest risk is you're going to be bored looking at colored squares on the computer screen. That's expedited. Full review could be something like more than minimal risk. So we have to think about our risks and our benefits. So ultimately, when you are proposing something for your IRB, to approve a study, you need to have shown that you've tried to minimize any unnecessary risk. So for example, for my participants who might become bored, they have to press a button to begin each trial. And I encourage them that if they need to take a break between trials, they are more than welcome to do so. Additionally, the risks of the study need to be outweighed by the benefits. So when we talk about minimal risk, this is basically the probability and the magnitude of harm is no greater than what you would encounter in everyday life. So here's where it gets kind of interesting. Something that might be minimal risk for you may not be minimal risk for a different group of people. So for example, if I brought you, a bunch of college students, into a research study and said, I'm going to give you a memory test, is that minimal risk? For you, absolutely. How many tests have you had lately? You're used to tests and things like that. Now, let's say I do the exact same thing, but I do it with a group of older adults. I go, hey, come on in. You're going to do a memory test. This is an instance where it may not be minimal risk. And here's why. First of all, think about your average older adult. Your average older adult hasn't been in school for years. Additionally, if we're talking about the Western Hemisphere, your average older adult has basically grown up in this environment that has a lot of negative stereotypes about aging, especially with regard to aging and memory. I can't tell you how many times I've told people, I'm a memory researcher, and an older adult will go, oh, don't even come talk to me, mine's terrible. We have a lot of stereotypes about aging in the Western Hemisphere, and so something that is minimal risk for you might be very, very upsetting or anxiety-inducing to an older adult because of their experiences, and thus it may no longer be minimal risk. So minimal risk is very much defined by the group that you're trying to study. Now, when we talk about harm, there are different types that we have to consider. Different types of studies have different types of harm. So for example, we can have studies that involve physical harm. Maybe we are looking at physical fitness and people have to run on a treadmill. There could be a risk of physical harm. Somebody's heart could be in trouble. So maybe we have to do, to kind of reduce that risk of physical harm in our studies, we may need physical exams or medical monitoring. This is also going to be really important if we're doing drug studies. If we're looking at different types of therapeutic treatments, we're going to want to have medical monitoring so that adverse effects do not occur. There is psychological harm. So for example, my research methods instructor was asking very, very sensitive questions related to relationships to one's body, one's relationship with food, how they felt about their body. That can be more than minimal risk depending on the context. And that can cause psychological distress. There can be the chances for economic or legal harm. So for example, if I'm doing a research study in the workplace to look at alcohol abuse and how that might affect people in the workplace, people who take part in my research study may out themselves as drinking on the job and may potentially end up losing their job as a result of that, or they could potentially be sued by the company. So there are economic harms, like financial harms. You could lose your job. There are legal harms. You might be sued. And there's also social harm and loss of privacy. So maybe I go into the workplace and I ask people survey questions about their boss, what they think about their boss. So I'm like an industrial organizational researcher, and I ask people, tell me your thoughts about the boss. And guess what? I don't make the survey totally anonymous. So the boss figures out who said what and basically outs that person. That person could potentially lose their privacy and experience social harm. They could be ostracized by the people that they work with because of what they said and because people know what they said. And that could also potentially lead to economic or legal harm if the boss decides to retaliate. So when possible, we want to try to minimize these things. All right, what do you say? One more slide, and then we'll call it a day. Sound good? All right, thanks for sticking it out. I want to talk a little bit about privacy. We have to ensure as much as possible that our data is anonymous and confidential. So really quick, anonymity and confidentiality are two completely different things. Anonymous means that I can't identify the participant from their data. So for example, if I collected data from all of you in a research study and I'm like, oh, look at Stella's data. Oh, there's Julia's data. That's not as good. Like, you don't want to be able to identify a participant from their data. We want anonymity. One of the great things about a lot of the research that I do, I'm not looking at individual data. I aggregate everybody's data. I want to see what people are doing as a whole. But regardless of how you analyze that data, you want to protect people's identities. We don't want to identify the participant from our data. Additionally, if we are collecting that identifying information, we can't give it out to other people without their consent. We also don't give out identifying information in the report of findings. Anonymity and confidentiality is important because number one, it protects your participants. I'm not going to give out your information to advertisers who might want to make a buck off of you. That's not doing you any favors. And additionally, especially when we're talking about survey research where I'm asking you very difficult questions that are very hard to answer, if you know that you're anonymous and that your data is not going to be tied to your identity, you're going to be a lot more honest about how you feel. And that's important. I want data that is real. I do not want data that is fake. Okay, so that is all we have for this time. Next time at the beginning of class, I will show you how to, I will show you where you can locate the materials you need for your mock IRB proposal. I will also walk you through the rubric. And then we will talk about working with special populations and also what you should do if somebody's in an fMRI scanner and it looks like they've got a tumor. Do you tell them or do you not? I know, right? I left you on a cliffhanger. So no quiz this weekend because you already completed it, and I am sorry about that again. So enjoy the warmer weather and walk carefully. That snow, because it's melting, we've got a mix of like snow, ice, and slush. Walk like a penguin. All right, have a great weekend, everybody, and take care. Bye. Goodbye.